Hello, today's lesson is converting fractions, decimals, and percent. And we're going to create this sheet and hopefully you can use this as a reference if you need to refer back to it during this unit. So let's get started. Mathematically, we represent the same value in a variety of ways. We can give a certain value several different names depending on what family of numbers we are working with. We will model 1/2, 0 and 5/10, and 50% to prove that they all mean the same value, even if the names are very different. So we're going to start with a fraction name, 1/2. The denominator, the bottom number, tells us to divide the square, or any figure, into two equal parts. And the numerator, the top number, tells us to shade one of these pieces. So to follow the directions, we're supposed to divide the square into two equal parts. So I'm going to just eyeball it. I'm going to say that about this much is two equal parts. We have a top and we have a bottom. Next, it says to shade one of them. And this doesn't really matter, but I'm going to go ahead and choose the bottom half. So I'm going to shade the bottom half. And I'm just not going to take time to do a beautiful coloring job. So based on our model, we have shaded half of this. So half is shaded, half is not. Let's move on to the decimal name. The decimal name is 0.5, or read correctly as 5/10. This tells us to divide the square, any figure, into 10 equal parts. So the place value, tenths, tells us that we're dividing in 10 parts. And the number 5, we need to shade 5 of them. So because I did the bottom half on the other square, I'm going to do the same. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm going to shade these 5 at the bottom. So again, I'm not going to do a perfect coloring job, but I can see that, oh, I'm shading the same amount. And if you think of it, I shaded 5 out of 10, which would be equivalent to 1/2. So now let's move on to the percent name, 50%. And percent means 50 out of 100. The suffix cent is 100 and percent. So per 100. This tells us to divide the square, or any figure, into 100 equal parts and shade 50 of them. So each of these rows has 10 little squares in it. So once again, I'm going to start from the bottom and I'm going to shade. This would be a row of 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. So I'm going to shade first, second, third, fourth, and fifth row. So I'm shading 50 little squares, but if I compare them, I can see that we've shaded the same amount. So again, even though these look very different, when we compare them, they're the same value. So knowing that we can create an equivalent value with a different name is very helpful. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to take each one of these sections, or each one of these families rather, and we're going to convert it to another family and what it would look like if it represented the same value. So the decimal, there's two different ways we could do this. We can take the number, in this case it's 87, and we can, 86, we could divide it by 100. So I'm going to drop the percent. The percent number is 86, and I'm going to divide it by 100. And that would give us 0 and 86 hundredths. Oh, and that makes sense, since this is, percent means 86 out of 100, 0 and 86 hundredths would make sense. The other method, and the shortcut method that's used frequently, is to drop the percent and scoop the decimal place 2 places left. So let's try that. So I'm going to drop the percent, and you might be saying, well, what decimal should I scoop to the left? So for each whole number, there's actually an implied decimal point at the end, and we normally don't write it because we most of the time don't need to use it. However, once we do need to use it, we put it at the end, to the very right of the end of the number. So now this says I'm supposed to scoop 2 places to the left. So I'm going to drag that decimal. I'm going to scoop it 1 place value under the 6, the ones, and 1 place value under the 8, the tens place, and I have 0.86. We also like to put a 0 placeholder for the ones spot. So that's what it would look like if we use the shortcut method. Now let's move on to converting a percent to a fraction. And this says write percent as a fraction and reduce it. And because percent means a number out of 100, I'm going to write 86 over 100. And when we reduce, we try to figure out the highest number we can think of that will go into both numbers. So sometimes it's hard to know what the highest number is, the greatest common factor. So I'm going to start with 2. And if I divide 86 by 2, I get 43. If I divide 100 by 2, I get 50. And there is not another number that I can divide evenly into 43 and 50. So we're done. So the fraction way to say 86% in reduced form is 43 out of 50. There's another way to do this, and we can use our calculator. So I'm going to do this. There's actually several ways we can do this. And I'm going to start once again by writing 86 over 100. I'm going to put my percent over 100. And sure enough, we came up, the calculator says it's 43 over 50. So now let's move on. And by the way, there are other ways that we could do what we just did. However, this is a lengthy reference sheet, so we want to move as quickly as we can. So I'm going to start now with a decimal. We're given 0 and 25 hundredths. And to convert it to a percent, it says I'm supposed to multiply by 100. So we would take whatever decimal we're given, in this case it's 0 and 25 hundredths, and we would multiply by 100. And what you would get would be 25, and then we have to attach the percent sign. The other method is to scoop the decimal 2 places to the right. Well, that makes sense because when we went the other way, when we went from percent to decimal, we went 2 places, but it was to the left. So now we're going to try doing the inverse, or the opposite. We're going to take the decimal, we're going to scoop it 2 places, 2 placement values, or place values, to the left. And so what I see right now is I have 0, 2, 5, and the decimal is there. So I no longer need the 0, and frankly, I don't need the decimal. So the best way to write this would be 25 without the decimal and without the 0 with the percent sign. We'll attach that. So 0 and 25 hundredths, if you think about it, that means 25 out of 100. This would be 25 out of 100. So let's move on. We're going to try making it a fraction. And it says read the decimal properly and reduce. Well, 25 100ths, or 25 hundredths rather, would be 25, and I just said hundredths, so I'm going to put 100. And then reduce it. And again, the greatest common factor, it turns out, is 25. However, if you divided by 5 and then divided by 5 again, we're still going to get the same answer. So 25 out of 100, if you think about money, would be 1/4 or 1/4. The second method is to once again use our calculator. And we're going to enter the decimal in the calculator and then press a few more special keys. So we are going to enter our decimal. In this case, it's 0 and 25 hundredths. Then we're going to press the second key in the upper left-hand corner, and then you're going to find a key that says PRB, PRB. And above that key, it says it has a little F and a little arrow and D, which means fraction to decimal. So now if you press enter or equals, it's going to tell you 1/4. All right, so we have one more series to go through. All right, so now we're looking at a fraction, 1/5, and we're going to convert that to a decimal, and then we're going to convert it to a percent. So we're starting with a fraction, and it says we should divide the numerator by the denominator. Our numerator is 1, and our denominator is 5. And there's a saying that says, top dog, our first dog, gets the house. So we're going to put 1 inside our division house, and we're going to put 5 on the outside. And it's very common, because 5 is the bigger number, for students to want to put the 5 inside. But we have to put the top number inside. So when I look at this now, I can clearly see I can't make a group of 5 because I have 1. So I'm immediately going to have to use my decimals, and I'm going to attach a 0, which doesn't add value. 1 and 0/10 is the same thing as 1. However, it's going to help me. So I'm going to put a 0 placeholder up here, and now this number is really 1 and 0/10, but I'm going to look at it like it's 10. So if I pretend this is 10, how many groups of 5 are in 10? Well, it's 2. I can make 2 groups of 5. And so that 2 groups of 5 would be 10. And so I now have my 0 remainder. So it turns out that 1/5 is the same thing as 2/10 in decimal form. So now let's look at the other way we can do this. And this should say, as I look at this right here, this should say enter decimal, but we're entering a fraction. Okay, so we're entering the fraction. So we're going to enter the fraction 1/5, and then we're going to press some special keys. So we're going to start with 1 ABC 5. That would enter my fraction. And then, just like we did a few minutes ago, we're going to enter the second key, or press the second key. Then we're going to press PRB. And then we're going to press enter or equals. So right above this key, again, you probably noticed it says F, but it has an arrow that goes both ways. F for fraction, D for decimal. Well, the arrow means that we can go from a fraction to a decimal, or from a decimal to a fraction. And once again, when you press enter, you should have 0 and 2/10. So this is our final group. Now we're going to start with a fraction, and this time we're going to make it into a percent. So this says to convert it to a decimal, and then scoop the decimal 2 places to the right. So this is what this would look like. We'd start by taking 1 divided by 5, and we would get 0 and 2/10. We just got done doing that. Then we would take the decimal and scoop it 2 places to the right. 1, 2. So the decimal is here, it's no longer here. So here's what I have right now. I have 0, 2, and 0, and that doesn't necessarily look how we'd like it to look. So we don't need this 0 anymore, and we actually don't need the decimal, because we just usually write whole numbers just as they are without the decimal. We only put it there if we need that decimal. Finally, the last way we can do the same thing is to write and solve a proportion, and it would look like this. The fraction that they give us equals x over 100. So let's try that. We're going to start with 1/5, that's the fraction we're using in this case, equals x over 100. And we're doing that because a percent is a number out of 100. We just don't know what that number is. So we're going to cross multiply. It doesn't matter which butterfly wing you start with, 5 times x, or we could do this another way, but for now I want to review how you use cross multiplication in a proportion. 1 times 100 would be 100, and then we're going to divide both sides by 5, and answer would be x equals 20. Very nice. So I briefly mentioned there is another way to do this, and I just want to show you. We don't have to necessarily use the proportion method, but since we are reviewing that, we will need it in this chapter, I chose to do it. Another way to do this is to look, we know 5, the denominator of 5, and we know the denominator of 100. And I'm going to ask myself, how many times do I need to take 5 to get to 100? Well, it turns out that that is times 20. And I'd have to do the same thing here, 1 times 20, and I would, again, x would equal 20. Thanks so much for listening, and please, please make sure you have this all written down so you can refer back to it if you need it during this chapter. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.